Hi, am I audible? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Let me set my timer a little bit. Okay. My speech will start in three, two, one. So under the motion, this house regrets China's dominance in renewable energy manufacturing. So what we've seen currently, there's a flood of EVs and also solar panels coming from China. It's because their dominance in the supply chain of the manufacturing of the renewable energy from the raw material sourcing from Africa, 90% of the rare metal coming from Africa to the product that they produce by themselves. So that's the context of the world that we are living in, right? So knowing that China for the couple of years has this kind of significant growth in renewable energy, and this this create a fear and also most likely a harm towards the environment, which I will explain later, because China is really unpredictable. For example, if you criticize their human rights violation, for example, in Uyghur, he will simply cut off those countries and limiting certain supplies which essential for those countries. So that's why we think that it is not good for the development of the combating climate change that we are trying to push right now. So our stance as a OG is we don't want any dominance in renewable energy. As we have a Paris Agreement, we want to have a fair share of the technology and also resources to combat the climate change, which is urgent for our lives. Two issues I'm going to bring on my speech. First, how the dominance principally will create an unfair political tool for China through the dominance of such uh, renewable energy manufacture supply chains. Ideally, renewable energy is the new source of life for our economy currently as the result of transition from oil, which is coming from our commitment, for example, Paris Agreement. That's why the material resources and technology should be allocated fairly based on those agreements, right? So that's why the moment when we allowing China to have the most significant uh, power to control and to dominate the supply chain coming from the material in Africa, where they send most of their workers to exploit the natural resources in there because simply they have the technology, they have the intellectual property on how to produce that. This is where it becomes wrong because it's actually first violating the fair share that we agreed on the technology to protect the environmental issue. But second, for example, when we have a goal 2030 zero emission according to Paris Agreement, right? Because secondly, since we have already explained to you that the characteristic of China is really unpredictable, so when China can have this kind of some sort of uh, sorry, no POI, when they can have some sort of power coming from the renewable energy, which is currently becoming the most hot topic and hot energy right now, they can simply cut off any country who don't want to cooperate or even trying to criticize the human rights violation within them. And we don't think that this is the scenario that we want, right? Just like what I have explained to you previously. So this is where how it will create a tension between geopolitics between Asia and also Western, because it will create an affair of a unfair or imbalanced power where China will use this renewable energy as a political tool. Because in comparison, if you have a fair share of technology and environment, just like what we're trying to pursue in Paris Agreement, this is where there will be no country that will have the chance to use the renewable energy in terms of intellectual property or even the source material. There will no they will not have the power to use it as to be translated into political power. That's why under our side, the renewable energy will not be used as a political tool, but it's become the common capital to be used by a lot of countries to combat the effect of climate change. That's why that's why fair political tool only happen the moment when there is no China domination. Second issue, why it will eventually will create more harm towards the environment and Western decarbonizations. Because the moment when it is highly dominated by China, as the violation in the issue one that I've explained previously, with it goes to the second issue, which in practice toward environment. Because you have to understand that the carbon that is being accumulated in our environment is not only coming from China, but it's also coming from the Western and also European. So the moment when China have this kind of political tool to control the renewable energy in combating the climate change issue, two things will happen. First, the Western will have less likely power to decarbonize themselves because first they have more like they cannot condone the human rights violation, for example, in Uyghur, or even how people being stripped down their rights to speak about themselves. And this is how it will create more harm towards the decarbonization towards environment, which will affect us all. Or secondly, the moment when there's a monopoly, they can control the price, which will make it harder for other countries to purchase, or even just to control. Uh, it will force other countries to follow whatever their instruction just to be able to purchase those renewable energy. Just like what China did back then in manipulating yuan for their own trade, right? So that's why under China dominance, we think that it will be more harmful not only for geopolitical but also for environmental decarbonizations, because exactly China is unpredictable in terms of growth, but is predictable in terms of gaining benefit, and we don't want that to happen. That's why we need common control, and that's the only way is by not having China dominance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, LO.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. POI through unmuting yourself, yeah. I really hope there's POI because I haven't received any today. Okay. Gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The team that wins this debate is a team that can prove who has the best way to save the earth. OO is gonna be very clear. We can save the earth if people are able to switch from oil and gas to renewable goods. This means two things important for how this debate to operate. One, huge level of volume increase in distributing the energy goods. This means getting the goods, the renewable energy goods to your country so that you are able as an individual to have the choice to buy it. The goods is there in the stores next to your homes, in your country, you're able to buy it. Or two, huge level of individuals who is able to access the goods, as in able to pay for it within their purchasing bracket, within their consumption rate. Your pay wage is able to pay for it once you have that choice. So that's the framework that we need to use, who is able to distribute those goods better. OO believes China's dominance should be celebrated because we're the only ones who is able to get that done. The argument will just be one argument on why this is the best way to democratize renewable energy goods. China have always had a unique positioning in the global market. 3 explanations. One, advanced technology goes through research. China is a country that builds itself off of a mass volume trades with other countries. The economy is propelled by mass consumption, both from the many people inside China, but also the massive volume of trades that is done to other countries outside of China. Why does this happen? A, they invest a lot on research on how to maintain quality with cheaper production. Sustainable energy manufacturing like EVs have existed for a long time, we admit, initiated by the West. But the Western world lagged in developing necessary research on how to make it cheaper because the belief in the Western world, who, like America, is focused on oil, is that they believe it will not be profitable or it will not be accessible for individuals. The development and rise in trend happens thanks to China, who is able to do the research and bear that cost. EV batteries previously only made for big machines in America are now able to be installed in domestic cars used by your mother. At the end of the day, this happens because the priority of government in China have always been on how to make it cheaper due to more volumes that are going to be sold, more volumes in production, is ensuring that the machine that is utilized to make this happen is utilized to the maximum level, ensuring that the price per piece of the good is going to be lower as opposed to the Western world who focuses on small amount of production, which makes the price per good higher. I hope this logic makes sense to you. Second, it's cheaper, accessible price. The reason as to why this happens exclusively in China, not only is because of the huge volume I talked to you about, but because usually the Western world price to make their product more inaccessible due to the value creation. You see this in lots of Western world products like bags like LV, for example, or cars like the Mustang, which are priced at way above the cost that is needed to produce it because a lot of the investment is made in marketing, in trying to make the product look luxurious, trying to appeal to the high level of buyers that are only exclusive in the Western world because they're the ones who are privileged enough due to colonization or whatever to make higher amounts of money than the rest of us peasants in Asia. What this does is that the trend in Western world have always been to maximize the cost, and that's where China comes in. They see there is a gap in the market, and that's where they usually come in to take that cheaper price and make it more accessible. Why then is all of this good? One, when you have a lot of trade deals, which is what China have, it means that the chances of distribution of the renewable goods to happen for China to other countries is better. How does this work? Three reasons. One, due to the cheaper price as a nature of China, easy, more countries will be able to buy it. I think that's common sense. But two, say you have been exporting with Indonesia for a long time as China. It will be easier for you to introduce EV as part of the products that you want Indo to buy, and they are more likely to buy because they have an interest to maintain good relations with you. They trust you, for example. It might be even a gesture of goodwill, for example, to get that product from you. This happens due to the history of China to have had many trade partners, especially with countries who might not be in the interest of Western to trade with because they do not provide more value. They're actually catered by China. This ensures that the smaller part of the world are able to be catered. But lastly, in parts of negotiation, commodities are usually utilized as a leverage to get cheaper price. China would say things like, hey, we'll export you steel at a cheaper price if you also buy EV from us. Repertoire of export is one of the ways in which China could utilize to get you to upsell. This means increasing the basket size of your country in export deals, or to ensure that you are able to get higher price, to get goods that that they need with a cheaper price, like steel or food, for example, and then introduce another product so that you ensure that they are reliant on you. This is good because distribution is increased, right, in a way that ensure that even cheaper countries now have more access towards this, which proves the distribution point. But second, it pushes the Western world to innovate. China's dominance is what triggered EU to act in which in 2025, in response of China's dominance in renewable energy, they've committed to focus on investments on renewable energy. Brands from the West sees that there is market trend in the rise of Chinese brands like BYD they are now forced to innovate further as a response of China's increased dominance. This is the necessary wake-up call so that the Western world is able to leave their oil-invested mine. This ensures distribution also happens in the Western world because of China's dominance at the end of the day. That's why I celebrate that. But why then is all of this important? Ultimately, when it comes to climate change, the number of people who use the clean energy is what is most important. The goal is to reduce carbon emission, and that can only happen when the distribution is happening not just to specific countries, but all across the world, which is what China is doing due to their market strategy in trading. Second, the comparatives in the absence of Western world, they were if West were the one who controls the market, they're going to make this a luxury good the way they do with their luxury cars or luxury bags, for example, making it inaccessible. But for China, it's a way for them to ensure that their past mistakes is refuted. They've always focused on plastic, on making mass goods that makes lots of carbon emission. Making them focus on clean energy is a way for us to cut down their production in carbon emission because now they focus on something that is good for the earth. Proud to propose.
Okay, thank you. Next, TDM.
Am I audible?
Yeah, audible.
Hmm. Let me set up my timer. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Government burden is not to prove that the alternative is possible, but to prove that the alternative is desirable, regardless of how feasible it is, right? So I got explaining why China in the first place actually monopolizes and get to the point where they monopolizes this is not really relevant. And also they talk about how Western world will try to make this a luxury and how they will not make it affordable enough and massive enough to actually cater the needs of our of the world to actually transition, right? We think that this is false to begin with, that in a world where you have a more equal market share, you will generally have similar market price. We see a lot of like even Western brands or even like South Korean or Taiwan brands actually being competitive towards like Chinese brands. If you see, like for example, Samsung actually releases flagship phones that are as cheap or even cheaper than Xiaomi and other like Chinese brands, right? That is to say that the process of outsourcing has always happened. That is to say, for sophisticated technology, you see the semiconductor being produced in the Europe or the United States, where the less sophisticated parts of the technology, for example, like the casing of the iPhone, is always being produced or manufactured within China, Vietnam, or other like more developing countries. This is to say that it is very possible for Western countries to actually do this, and I think that this is not really the point of the debate, right? Because I think my first speaker has already told you the Chinese political agenda is something that is concerning to begin with. I'm not going to say that, oh, China is definitely an evil actor, because that doesn't really matter, right? Regardless of China is actually evil or not, I think what matters is that China has a bad reputation globally. That is to say, we all have to understand that if what Elgard wants to achieve is something that is feasible, that is to say, we want to transition completely from oil and fossil fuel towards energy, renewable energy, it is something that is very, very risky, right? Because we are going to be completely dependent on China. What does this mean, right? Because if 100% of your energy comes from renewable energy, this means that the renewable energy holds the same power as energy in the past, right? That is to say that if something happens to your solar panel, then you have to fix it urgently, right? Otherwise, you are going to have a nationwide collapse. Otherwise, people are going to be very angry about it. Otherwise, like basically, you are going to be overthrown, right, as a government. To say that there are a lot of defaults caused by energy. For example, in '98, when the oil price actually increases, then we actually have an economic crisis. One of the reasons that's that, right? So there are two important things to take away from that. Number one is the possibility that people are not going to want to adopt the technology exactly because China is the one that is spearheading it. We're talking about the United States, for example, exactly not wanting to actually opt into renewable energy. We are talking about Europe or skeptical countries, for example, like Indonesia, where there are a lot of anti-Chinese and sentiment, where these countries are not going to be willing to transition to solar panel because they don't have any other option, right? In our side of the house, we provide multiple options. So people with different countries with different political alignment will be able to choose and will be able to adopt it faster. So for your objective to actually transition very fast, you are not going to achieve it anyway. Second is that China is not stable enough. So you have to understand that we are putting all our eggs in one basket in in this case, right? That is to say, when there is a dominance, you don't really have any option. We think that when certain countries monopolize certain commodities, it is very important to make sure that those countries are very stable. We are talking about, for example, in the 80s, where our oil crisis, exactly because of the Arab Spring, where OPEC countries are not really politically stable, and they are the only ones that actually holding the oil prices together, right? That's to say, when their army collapses, the entire world actually goes into worldwide economic crisis, and there are a lot of countries that are actually falling in that, right? So we regret that. Why is China not stable enough compared to the US, Western countries, or other like manufacturing hub in the world like Taiwan or South Korea, right? Because number one, we have the real estate crisis like the Evergrande that is actually like boiling right now. Second, we have the regional government debt crisis. We have the demographic crisis with the political dissent of the younger generations of China. So really, the political power of Xi Jinping is not really that powerful anymore to begin with, right? That is to say, if the Chinese economy is a bubble that is going to pop, and they are also very dishonest, right? They devalue the yuan, they fake their GDP data. So we don't really have the ability to actually determine whether China is going to survive or not, whether China is going to be stable or not in the future, right? So I think we regret. I'm not saying that China will fall. I'm not saying that China will definitely collapse. But generally speaking, if you are very dependent on a commodity and that is going to make or break your country, you are not going to want it to be completely dependent on a country that is itself very unstable, that is itself having a lot of like economic crisis, and no, and yeah, so basically you are putting all your eggs in one bad basket. I think the comparative is more desirable. And lastly, I'm going to prove to you that it's not as easy as Elgard said, that okay, that this is just the incentive for Western countries to actually catch up, to actually like all band together to defeat BYD or whatsoever, right? Understand that renewable energy manufacturing is something that is built up. It is very expensive, but it's not something that you can just, we are behind, so we can catch up. Understand that number one, you have very sophisticated patents. That's to say you have an accumulative advantage of actually like building your patents over and over, and your opponents, your competitors has to start over, right? That is to say that the various components that is within manufacturing this EVs or solar panels are very complicated, that China is going to have the be ahead of the technological curve for a long time. Second, the monopoly of rare earth, right? That understand that China has 90% monopoly of the rare earth materials to begin with. That is to say, even if you somehow be able to close the gap on the technology, it is very unlikely for them to be just be able to procure exactly all the different materials. It's already six. All the different materials that are needed to actually produce this, right? That is to say, it's very unlikely for them to just say that. Number three, the infrastructure, exactly all the plants are already very large scale. Like Elgard said, right? China is the manufacturing hub. They are able to actually push everything cheaply and efficiently. So it's very hard for you to actually close the gap to begin with. And number four, you have the data, right? BYD produces like hundreds of thousands to millions of units every single year. So that is to say, you have the data for better user experience. You have the data for better like efficiency of the battery, that you are able to accumulate all these different insights that you get from the data, from the massive manufacturing of your products in the first place, that you are able to not close, Western countries will not be able to close the gap, but China will be able to push their accumulative advantage to get ahead and to monopolize even more of the renewable energy market. So it's going to stay worse and get worse. And yeah, so basically we don't want to put all our basket in an unstable basket that is authoritarian, that doesn't have the goodwill to actually like protect the world. Thank you.
Thank you. To close the opening half, Diego.
Heard? Sorry, can I be heard?
Yep.
POI through chat. Let's not confuse the timeline here. Opening government cannot win this debate by naming a lot of examples of products that are as cheap as Chinese products. This only happens for two reasons. The first is because of market segmentation, which is uncomparative. And secondly, the argument that we push from the beginning of opening opposition is that this only happens because China enabled it. Because absent the rise of BYD, absent the rise of Wuling, absent the rise of solar panel companies from China, there's little to no incentives for the companies in the West or companies like Western allies like Taiwan and Japan to actually develop these things that are quite affordable to a lot of people. So yes, opening government's examples might be true, but opening government's examples are heavily contingent on China dominating it first. Then opening government's last defensive line was to say that China has bad reputation, so the states do not want to transition. Come on. Factually untrue. A lot of states are probably pragmatic. In Indonesia, you see more and more electric cars. That's why they keep on lowering the tax for electric cars and they keep on rising the price of gasoline because they want a lot of individuals to transition to electric cars. But moreover, renewable energy is getting cheaper and cheaper, and they're also very, very tired of the volatile price of oil. That is, a point of geopolitical tension in Middle East, Israel and Palestine and stuff like that. Also relying on Russian gas and stuff like that. People just don't want to do that anymore. A lot of people want to transition to renewable energy. I'm unsure as to why China having a bad reputation, which also empirically did not really affect Chinese economic relationship with a lot of other countries, including the West. I'm not sure why states are not likely to opt into working with China because of that reputation, if that is the last offensive line from OG. So the first line that we push from opening opposition is that China is the only actor capable. And I think this will win the debate quite clearly because the debate is not about whether China is good or China is bad, but whether China is whether there are alternatives that can replace China to begin with. And we prove through three reasons why there isn't. The first is because China is the most stable economy in the world. They don't get affected too much by geopolitics, unlike the US and EU, which also relies on the price of gold, the price of global oil reserve. China's economy continues to rise even during COVID. Why? The reason for that is because the economy is not intertwined in one subject at all. They diversify the risk. Yes, real estate is one of them, but they also diversify through massive infrastructure building through BRI. This is literally another diversification from China to necessarily peg their economy to renewable energy resources. So when opening government says that China has real estate issue, that's why it can collapse at any time. Please wake up. The majority of the world have USD as a foreign currency reserve, although they know that the US can fall anytime if Trump wins in the next month. At best, this is uncomparative. But also beyond that, opening government dug their own grave when they said that China has the monopoly over 90% of the rare earth mineral. That probably suggests that only China can do this because China already has a lot of initial budget, for example, as opposed to other Western countries, which probably not only that government did not prove why they want to, but also even if they prove that they want to, they're unable to prove that they can. Meanwhile, we prove in opening opposition that China is the only actor that can do it based on all the economic reasons and economic stability arguments. The second reason is because China has a unified approach and a consistent policy, i.e. they're always consistent in promoting renewable energy to diversify their economy as well, i.e. because oil and gas are quite rare in East Asia and Middle East was mostly dominated by the West at the time of the inception of the renewable energy. That means that China was the only one who was willing to take risk. The reason for that is because they're able to allocate massive budget through things like industrialization and massive infrastructure building through things like BRI. That because most companies in the US and EU and a lot of Western allies like Taiwan and South Korea, most of them are old. Most of them are conservative companies like Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, for example. Or even at the worst case scenario in the US, the policy regarding green and renewable energy changes every 4 years. So that probably means that you have little to no consistent policy, but you also have little to no backing or reasons for you to want to diversify your economy and to make it democratized. But the final reason is what Elgard mentioned, i.e. China has massive connection to the biggest market in the world in Asia and Africa. That means that they're able to give electric vehicles and green technology at a far cheaper price without the very expensive transport and additional customs fee. Also means that it is way easier for Chinese companies like BYD to immediately do foreign direct investments supported by the state as opposed to just exporting their products while the company remains in China. What does this mean? This means two things. The first is that this means that absent Chinese dominance, there are little to no development or the development will be very elitist. I would in fact fact flip this. I would argue that because of China, then companies like MG, then Hyundai, for example, can also democratize. So our case is logically prior to government's idea of decarbonization. But secondly, absent China shifting to renewable energy, all of those money that China would have spent on BYD and Wuling would have been spent on something that is far more damaging, i.e. conventional cars. So every yuan could have made the world a better place that would not happen in Gulf. That means that even if you buy all of the government's arguments that China is bad, there really is no other alternative if you really care about saving the world. But even if the West could do that, which government did not prove until the end of opening, they also play equally dirty, right? I.e. they ban crude palm oil from Indonesia. They sanction and embargo states. They freeze USD foreign currency reserves every time they think that the state are not acting well. And that's assuming the best case of them even wanting to do that. Why? They don't want to do that. And the reason for that is because they have the monopoly in oil. They want to make sure that the rest of the world does not, the rest of the industrializing world in the global south does not transition to renewable energy, because that would have lost them their hegemony over the world's economy. So all the reasons suggest that not only that the West cannot, they also don't want to. China is the only one that wants and can do this to begin with. But even if you don't believe that, what does it need to be dominant? The first reason is because dominance is necessary to be democratized, i.e. massive competition will create a lot of competition, right? Burning money, they need to develop a lot of factory. So that means that they need to get ROI too. Because of the competition, they cannot reduce price because each of these companies want to get their ROI as soon as possible. The reason why Hyundai and MG products are always so expensive. What the dominance allows is that it allows price to be cheaper. That the reason for that is because you don't need to compete with others. That means that you only know that you are the monopoly of the market. A lot of people will continue to buy your products anyway, with or without you necessarily raising the price to be very, very high. So that probably means that there's less incentive for them to make the price very high because they know that they will still get ROI in the end of the day. But secondly, I think I would flip the geopolitical tension idea from Gulf. Not only that massive competition would be even worse to begin with, insofar as the technological race will aggravate the tension in Gulf, but also a proxy between exporting companies in the West and China will create dependency. Why? Because they know that they're actively competing with one another. That means they want to make sure that their customers do not move to another provider, to another supplier. That means that they will be extremely predatory. That means that they're gonna create massive dependency so that they don't move to other suppliers to begin with. In the end, the West complied. But that not only the government didn't prove why they would have complied anyway, it is better due to the Chinese domination that we're able to create and make the world a better place. For all these reasons, okay.
Thank you. Next, GOV member.
Check. It's my first available. Is it time?
Yes.
Okay. Time. I feel free to unmute yourself. I'll probably take from opening branch for cross branch engagement. Okay. Begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm just going to start on just start directly on trying to discuss two things. Firstly, more EV is not always a net positive. It's so far to say for the environment, because this is something that Justin and Elgard never explained to us. Why did the massive volumes of EV directly leads towards a better environment to begin with? Because they just assume more volumes of EV, more individuals using EV is always a net positive. Two reasons why. Firstly, I'd argue EV generally is not always climate friendly. It's for example, you need to farms for nickel, you need to change battery, for example, every 2 years and whatnot. You also need to deforestate massively in order to create more mining hubs, more solar farms, and so on and so forth. It isn't as good as it is. We need to have better explanation coming from CO. But secondly, then, I'll flip this. More EV will become bad without the proper infrastructure and without the proper calculation that China isn't currently doing to begin with. Why so? Because the fact that China's strategy is divided into two parts. Firstly, they create low quality products in order to cheapen the production cost, for example, means that they need to change spare parts often, i.e. changing the battery often, changing the tires often, change the hood, and so on and so forth. Means that they always need to mine more things, mine more iron, and so on and so forth, in order to be able to replace the parts that are needed in order to fix these kind of vehicles to begin with. The comparative is that, for example, Western countries consider that they want to ensure that their market will always be there, that the fact that their narrative is that, high quality products means that they need to create high quality products to begin with, means that they also need to ensure that these kind of products will also be sustainable to begin with. Right? But second part of China's strategy is that they create cheap pricing and massive volumes. This is what basically open opposition tries to push. What is very problematic? It means that they need to sell and produce so many vehicles in order to profit. Why this bad for three structural reasons. Firstly, you need to exploit more materials in a faster rate. Means that, for example, you not care about sustainability because it will take too long because the technology isn't there yet. Means you are most likely deforest more, you will mine more, and so on and so forth. Because the moment China isn't able to create a massive volume of EVs, they won't be able to profit. Second structural reasons then is that most of the time, because they try to sell it as much as they can, the fact that currently in status quo, basically just what they try to told you, the infrastructure isn't there yet. Because the crucial calculus in trying to buy an EV as an individual isn't just about the price, but whether or not is it fun to use? Can you use it in your place? I.e., is there charging ports in is there charging ports? Is there the correct mechanic in your place in order to fix those kind of EVs and so on and so forth? This is later. This is more important because it leads towards whether or not we want to buy things, even if you can buy it, but if it is that fun, it isn't that practical to use, you still won't buy it. The comparative is that most likely than not, even it takes a long time, it is still okay because the infrastructure is still there. But lastly, cheap pricing has always been accessible because even in third world country, which is the main market of China, there are still more there is still more crude oil users, cars, for example, because basically, it isn't that accessible. Even if it is cheap, it is still not that accessible. So we question the delta under their side of the house. But before that, I'll take from opening.
So I'm confused because the comparative in your side is that you have little to no development not only on EV, but on a lot of renewable energy, because we told you a lot of reasons why the West are either unwilling or unable to do this to begin with. So any other arguments about democratization and the price being cheaper is exclusive and opening opposition, and you cannot claim that benefit as well.
Yeah, basically what I told you, even if it is true, it is still not impactful, especially towards the context of environment, because at best what you can say, it is more cheaper. Why is more cheaper is good? No explanation. Should have been brought in your argument. Second reason why, this also answers DPI, why China's domination isn't that good in order to create more EVs if you want to play under oppositions and opening governments cases. Firstly, the fact that the way that China creates its massive volumes to begin with means that, for example, there is less incentive to create eco-friendly production lines or things like sustainability. The comparative here is that very simple. The West have the incentive to not only profit but to create sustainable outcome. Basically, check and balance from their people. Comparative towards China, they do not care whether or not they destroy the world and whatnot. But the West have their obligation to follow what their people want, which mostly they want more sustainability, basically because of social movements and whatnot. But secondly, the fact that the main reason why no Western product is focuses on creating cheap things is because of China dominations begin with, right? Because logically, if there is no China and there are market segmentation that cheaper EVs doesn't exist, there is incentive for other companies around the world to exploit those market segmentations to begin with. But two reasons why. Firstly, why they can do this. Let's talk about the timeline. Firstly, the inception of EVs is very expensive, but China have not entered yet. But the second timeline then, it's in the mid-time where mostly it's trying to get cheaper, but not everybody have access to it. This will enters, right? But the fact that other countries do not want to create more cheaper products, even if it is the fact that if China does not exist, there is incentive to begin with, right? Because what Open Ocean told us, because nobody wants to do it in the very first place. Because during the inception, You cannot create cheap products. You can only create expensive products. Basically, this is what usually new product lines try to be created. You create it as good as it is in order for people to generate hype. Then you make a cheap part. But when you make a cheaper, China already enters, therefore, and the domination starts, therefore there is no place to go into. But secondly, then what do they want? Because here's the thing. Logically, if China is that massive, hence there is more incentive for the West to stick with crude oil, exactly because they do not want to compete within the renewable market. If China does not exist, there is more incentive for the West to improve their renewable market development and so on and so forth, exactly because there's less competition there compared towards crude oil. We flip this. But why then basically CG wins? Firstly, CG talks to you why then the main goal of this debate, why we create better environment. But secondly, we provide to you why the development is an a priori comparative towards massive volumes and more sellings, because even if you sell massive, if the production line is fucked up, the environment will still be fucked up. So proud.
Thank you. Next, I call upon what member?
Hi, is this audible?
Yep.
All right. Wait a second. Perfect method of UI, please just through unmuting yourself. Will probably take one if I have time. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. The way CEO is going to take this debate is not arguing whether China is a reliable and is a kind or evil actor in this debate. Irrespective of that, we understand that China is not the perfect and beautiful actor to be relied to, right? But the thing is that the celebration is something exactly important because we don't regret this, because this is the only thing that we can do in the context of Western not doing anything, right? OGs come to this debate talking on the exploitation in Africa and monopoly and whatnot. I think there's several things to frame them out of this debate. Firstly, something that's inexclusive. Just because China is that strong or even overpowered doesn't mean they have everything. Several raw materials are still in absence and cooperation is there with other countries. Meaning it's never a solid, unhealthy cooperation. Doesn't mean that they suddenly exploit everything and just make it like, to monopolize. Secondly, in comparative with other competent actors like Western countries or the US, for example, exploitation will still happen anyway. Meaning exploitation is something that symmetrically happen under the house, minimizing the harm that they're trying to bring in this debate. On the principle of cost and benefit weighing, they will always prefer cheap labor and raw materials. Has no difference at all under this of the house. But even worse, the regret makes no changes in energy transition. Secondly, they also jump directly to conclusion that China is inherently not preferable and people like the West more. The question then become whether West really want to do this. But if they want to actually do this, is the feasibility there? Because we're going to prove you why then the feasibility isn't there, that West is currently in the context that they are unable to actually conduct such energy transition, innovation and whatnot, especially under the time sensitivity context that we're going to champion is an opposition. Lastly then, China's downfall, Xi Jinping and whatsoever, is the least impactful response to this debate because everyone is now on their downfall anyway. US probably is not in their strongest in currency, and that's totally fine and brings nothing in this debate. Secondly, towards CG, right? The response is very weak, saying that more EV isn't equal to better environment. Yes, and challenging the current progress also doesn't equal to make any significance, right? At the very least, it's normalized that we're shifting to a better environment of having more EV, for example, triggering people to understand that this is the world that is time sensitive, that we want to shift to energy transition and whatsoever. Opening a position trying to come up to bring in the table on the idea of accessibility and cheap products and whatsoever. We're going to put more likelihood before jumping into the idea of access and the principal analysis that should be the basis of all discussion in this debate, why the celebration is not only something that is good but also inherently needed, right? Under also the house, in the agreed context, in the shortage of energies, we are in a crisis of ecological and green sectors. We said that it's totally time sensitive, meaning that you need to choose actions that is more preferable. Which means by celebrating this, right? Firstly, on the principle level, right? Why does China need to dominate? We're going to prove on principle level where it's inherently that the dominance is something that is needed. On two folds, right? One, we try to acknowledge the repression attempt for what's happened in the past. We don't want them to get away from the damage they've been contributing for far too long, for centuries ago. Note that China has always become number one in most of the destruction, the pollution, waste, up to manufacturing, contributing to destruction to ecology. For so long we demand for their action and responsibility, then this is how they do it. Sure, there's always a twist of evil and pragmatic intention, exploitation, competition, monopoly, you name it on that proposition. But the end goal is to always have a successful energy transition and climate fixation, because you are already always judged by the outcome. As more impacts mean more success driven by China, China has the incentive to make sure that the sustainability of energy and whatsoever is something that's going to be successful, right? Meaning that, especially when this evil intention can always be debunked, we think the harm of exploitation is something exclusive and should stand in this debate until the after discussion, right? We're talking about the check and balance, cooperation with other countries, even incentive for the rest countries to challenge this. Secondly, sure, West also contribute to crisis and whatsoever. Then it is judged by the intention. Insofar attempts are there, and China is the only actor to do the attempt, China's domination is to repay and needs to be celebrated. Second, then they should be ashamed for not doing anything in comparison to China's attempt, right? Second, on this second point, why this principally justified even needed, right? This is a price West need to pay for their negligence on climate crisis. You will still be blamed. You will still blame the West for their absence. If monopoly happened and China does that and wins the hegemony, they deserve it because of their absence and negligence. Secondly, on the perspective of the people, then West should be pushed to bring back to the contribution of environment. I mean that irrespective of China is a reliable or preferable actor to begin with in this debate, we still need to celebrate China because China is the only one that has their that we can rely on in the current status quo. That's why these arguments become the basis for all the discussion in three themes previously that makes us becomes higher than all things, right? Secondly, on a practical level, let's engage why in China dominance is something that's needed to become a catalyst for energy transition. On the issue of urgency and time sensitivity, we will win, right? Based on the context that why China needs to dominate is on two folds. First is on the feasibility and current global dynamics that you cannot actually find this in OO. We're talking about the rising right-wing phenomenon in most of Western nations that are capable of the making of renewable energy manufacturing. We're talking about US or European nations, for example. How does this look like? The right-wing populism has arisen these times, meaning that such policy enacted is right-wing leaning, which means policy that does not put climate and environment on top of the priority. If they're about to start making changes, feasibility is less likely to on due to geopolitical tension that currently happening in status quo, meaning that if government really wants to challenge China, their other alternative is also not reliable, directly debunking all the claims coming from CG. Secondly, maybe we will not deny that flaws are here and there. Maybe China is not the best and perfect actor. This is still significantly better than no progress towards energy transition at all. We would love to celebrate every little progress that matters in energy transition. Thirdly, and we said that meanwhile China has the huge interest in this to maintain their hegemony and all that, it's important to still be celebrated because we need China's advantage to help catalyze the urgent time sensitive in the case of the current crisis, the almost destroyed world. What does this mean? If you're about to make a healthier competition, you don't want monopoly and whatnot, then exactly you need to celebrate the current domination, especially on the context of US highly terrified of having its global position stolen by China, or even when other Western countries also innovate and makes it on top of their policy. Meaning that this is how development then accelerate. It's not on the fear of being monopolized, right? It means also that you're better having China's domination rather than witnessing your world collapsing, simply what CG wants to champion in this debate, right? What this point proves you is that China is not always the perfect or reliable actor, and we do not deny that. But celebration is important because one, you have no other actor. Secondly, exactly we need this celebration to trigger them to do this. Secondly, then, on the idea of easier, cheaper, and faster distribution production of renewable energy processes, we add what's most important that lacks on side OO, how China excels the manufacturing sectors, unlike OO that directly jump to access. We're talking about how China for far too long taking the manufacturing sector, when the supply chain is already settled and the metals and whatnot. This is why it becomes so much important, not just because the distribution is going to be easier, but it's more quicker, right? How is this important? Because we're dying. We need it as quick as possible. I mean that we have no time to argue whether China is good or not. If you oppose and still attacks, what we should do is celebrate every changes that matters. So proud.
Thank you. Next.
Check, check. Check, check. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Set my timer first.
starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. This that the bad reputation of China when for samples at the very beginning, they were a country that really relies on a profit-based country at the end of the day, meaning that the idea upon how China is consistently promoting upon the idea of energy or upon how this type of things or how China promoting it, meaning that it's not like it's going to be like that. Because why? Because notice that why China is promoting this, because at the end of the day, they feel like this is a thing that could gain more profits towards them, meaning that they didn't actually promote the type of environmental things, but then they promote the ideas whether or not if this product is cheap, and at the end of the day, they could create a massive production upon this product, meaning that their true or sole purpose upon creating this, upon the promotion, and today is going to actually will be focused on upon the idea of production and not upon the idea of the idea of environmental benefits, this, etc. Because what because today we actually know that China, for example, is the top country upon the idea of pollutions, this, that, etc. And also, like what Kak Kuku already explained to you, like for example, the China of some kind of products. We believe that the US like here have the incentive to actually create some kind of innovations upon the environment or upon the apa namanya, new energy, for example, like this type of stuff. We believe that US actually have the capability to do so, but then they didn't have the opportunity to do that, because what actually the domination of China buying US to actually didn't go other further, because what? Because right now what US thinks, for example, because at the end of the day they think about at the end of the day, they develop this type of they develop this type of technology. Like for example, the prototype of car, for example, like BMW, this, that, and that. They have those cars, for example, but then why they don't release it? Because at the end of the day, they didn't want to make this cheaper, because at the end of the day, China exists, for example. The domination of China limits the capability of US to actually to do this type of thing. Because why? Because at the end of the day, the US will think, or the Western will think, like for example, at the end of the day, they can do that. Because why? Because China already exists. Meaning that the idea upon cheaper price, this and this like won't be happen in the Western, because why? Because the domination of China exists. That is why we really regret this type of things. Now, moving on to argumentations talking about the comparative upon the idea of business strategy that happen inside the Western and US. Why do we support or we celebrate US more, for example, at the end of the day? Because what? Because first, talking about right here, what are actually the things that happen inside of the Chinese at the very beginning? We believe that Chinese is not that very. We believe that the business strategy of Chinese tourism is actually the idea of mass productions and also mass promotions, for example, compared to the US, for example, but they focus on the idea of development, for example, meaning that right now they focus on the idea of development, because why? Because in the day they know and they understand that the idea of electrical vehicle, for example, solar panels, this, that, etc., couldn't be implemented well inside of the world, for example, because why? Because in the day the idea of infrastructures didn't exist at the very beginning, and also it couldn't be effectively effectively bring some kind of profits inside of the world every day. Now, moving on. That is why we believe that the idea of numbers values the most inside the environmental is still questionable. Because why? Because today, what will happen upon all people using all of this technology? Because today, Chinese only focuses on the idea of overproduction. They didn't care about the quality of the product, for example. That is why Xiaomi exists, for example. Like that is why Xiaomi exists to actually fight iPhone, for example. Because why? Because they solely focus on the idea of chipset, this, that, etc. But then they didn't focus on the idea of software, meaning that this board would be used only 2 years and then you throw it away. Limbah still exists, for example. The idea of environmental still will questionable inside of the house, because what? Because, and also, no, use this context upon the idea of the electronic vehicle, for example. Like later, compare it, for example, by BYD to Tesla, for example, where BYD needs more type of maintenance, for example, meaning that now all of those people would buy this, more people would buy this every day, but more people will actually throw this away because it could be broken easily, for example, compared to other things that been developed by the US, for example. US right here want to develop this thing more so that at the end of the day it could be more effective. This is what is the thing that want to be maintained inside of the US every day. And also, talks about the idea of cheaper and more accessible. We believe that we believe that the idea like this, for example, we want to focus upon the idea of development, for example. Because why? Because at the end of the day, why the Western didn't want to do that at the very beginning? Because why? Because now they have developed the stuff of technology and then they make it limited, but people still buy it. We believe that it's okay, because why? Because at the end of the day, if you want a quality product, and yes, it will take a high price, for example, at the end of the day. And also the idea of maintaining environmental things, for example, you need a high you really need you really need that you still need those type of money for you to do this type of time, because at the end of the day you need to perfect this type of things, and that's why we believe that it's going to be better under our side of the house. And also talking about the idea of how China would do that,
Bring me for
because
6.
China right here, the dominance of China, making that they could do every single thing. For example, like the idea of mass production, space distributions, this, that, and etc. It's easy for them to do so. That is why we believe that the people will be more consumerism inside of their house. Because why? Because they will only take it for granted. Buy these things, for example, they don't care about the quality of the products, and they become FOMO, for example, use electrical vehicles. But then after this product broke, for example, they don't care about it. Meaning that right now the idea of environment still be questionable in the subject. That is why we believe. That is why proud to be by the government. Thank you.
Okay, close the debate. Off with.
Hello, am I audible? Okay. All right. Good afternoon. You have an APOI at box. Yeah. Sorry, my speaker. 3, 2, what? I've read through benches in this debate talking about practicality as to is actually China actually good actor to be celebrated when they have a huge dominance in the market and other stuff. It becomes something that's quite wishy-washy for the debate because there is no clear parameter. So is this particular China actually good or is bad or something along those lines? Just let me explain to you two things. First of all, why principally regardless if they are actually bad or not, when it's something that is correctly or worth celebrating because it will become a wake-up call for this particular Western people. There is being swayed, for example, the right party now, for example, to be taken care of because now they know that their market will be taken over, for example, by another actor or something of this size. Second of all, I think this is also celebrated. So how, for example, China will now, for example, try to repay every bad things they already done in the past. I think in principal manner, we win over every team badges, which is something that's really important because at the end of the day, regardless if China is actually a good actor or not, we can explain to you what is something that is worth celebrating at the end of the day. Two biggest problems that coming from government side of the house is because they assume that China will always be evil. There will be no any controllable mechanism that we can prevent for all this bad thing that China can do, and everything becomes something that's really bad because Western just suddenly give up, like what closing government explained to you. If we can prove to you that that the damages that China might have when they have this dominance can actually be controllable, the very worst case scenario. And second, we explain to you why the Western will still have a market to be tapped into, and there will be good competition among the EV cars or green renewable energy technology in the future. We win this debate. First of all, let's go to the idea, everything coming from closing government. I think this is the most confusing thing at the end of the day. I don't understand about the delta that closing government actually try to champion, especially when they have brought to you a big backlash that will explain that. First of all, let's see, they explain to you that, oh, there might be no longer market that the Western can tap into because China will always take the biggest market by the cheap products or something along those lines. Okay, but I don't understand. You are the one who agree that at the end of the day, you're the one who agree that at the end of the day, the renewable energy actually the most accessible things, and the conventional energy like the natural resource something runs out in the near future. So at the end of the day, there is no any incentive for the Western country, for example, to still stay in the conventional car at the end, because in the near future, under your logic, they will still no longer have a choice but to tap into the more renewable energy. At the end of the day, it proves to you that regardless of whether or not there is a dominance of China, when this dominance exists, for example, it will still be forced, for example, to want to tap into these particular things much faster, because back then they do, or for example, right now they don't have that much of incentive to want to invest that much. For example, in the near future, due to the time sensitivity, they will want to tap into much faster at the end of the day. With that being said, under your logic, they will still want to tap into because there is no any choice to just stay in the conventional energy at the end of the day, right? Second of all, Even if the West still want to focus in the expensive EV, for example, just let them be. I don't understand why this is something that's really become a harm because okay, let's say that China have a market in the cheap products and the Western have a much more maybe a value center type of product, for example, there will be better segmentation. This is not hard. This is a benefit because of better competition and the market segmentation in of itself. First of all, they say that oh, you're the one who explained that China might be so stupid by making something that is not long lasting, only last for 2 to 3 years at the end of the day. But under that logic, it means another country like Western, for example, can tap into this particular market that have a more long lasting product at the end of the day. With that being said, China, who do not want to their market to be taken over by another cheap product, we are more long lasting. They will try to make their product become long lasting. There is the logic under Xiaomi. Well, there are iPhone, for example, that have a high value. For example, they try to make Xiaomi there is more long lasting, a better technology or something along the science. Under that logic, there is no any particular thing. It is a backlash at the end of the day under the house that they say that they do not want to opt in. For example, they do not have there is no any market that the Western can tap into by saying that China will be too stupid by making their market can be stolen easily at the end of the day. That's why the closing government can is doing it this way. Let's go to the opening government. The idea that coming from opening government rests on the idea that I think Oji tried to say that it is better for the world to just collapse rather than having China dominate the EV market, right? It is something that's really bad because they are being left out by the other three benches who are more centered the idea about who can protect the environment better at the end of the day. But let's engage. First of all, in the idea of China, I think this is something that's really controllable. Exactly what Kristen explained to you. It is something that's controllable. They still need supply chain things, for example, another raw material from another country. With that being said, they will still try to, for example, to begin to another country. They still have bargaining position that another country can have, for example, to control the power that China have at the end of the day. With that being said, China will not be that bad. For example, there is still, for example, scrutiny from their country because they still want to, for example, promote their BRI mechanism at the end of the day. Second of all, they try to explain that people will no longer willing to adapt. I think it is also addressed by the opening opposition. In the pragmatic matter, at the end of the day, people still want to opt in, for example, and by Xiaomi, especially when there are a lot of threats that exist by China from to the Southeast Asia to the South America, for example, African countries or something like that. USA is not really a good example to be brought in this debate because they're an anomaly at the end of the day. All three benches agree that we should protect this environment, but opening government is the only thing that never explains to you how they will manage to protect the environment by regretting this particular mechanism. With that being said, they cannot win this debate at the end of the day. Let's go to the idea of opening opposition. I think opening opposition try to explain to you more about why this is really beneficial, why China is the best thing or something like that to control this EV market and stuff. Well, opening opposition might focusing the practical thing. I think closing opposition is the one that come to this debate talking about why does China earn the title, for example, to be celebrated because we are in the opposition, for example, the opposite of the regress by celebrating these particular things, where China worth the celebration at the end of the day, what is good to trigger this particular another country want to change. While opening opposition try to change the Western, for example, by taking another market, for example, we explain to you why there will be a huge change in this. By opening up opposition, analyzing, for example, what already happened in the past by the action of the Western, we explain to you what will happen in the action of the Western in the future. Because the trend right now in the winning of the Western front, the right wing, for example, the future will be something that's really bad. I think the certain future that we explain under our certain makes us become something that's different than opening opposition as a whole. Let's talk. What is the conclusion as to why we're winning this debate compared to everything benches in this debate? First of all, when you're talking about closing government, regardless they're talking about the battery of the product will be something that's really bad or something along the line. I think there is no any delta because at the end of the day, the conventional technology will still be far worse at the end of the day. This is the safe place and the safety choice, the safest choice that we can have because this is something that's time sensitive. We have, for example, really rapid changes in the climate right now. For example, now that there are a lot of more electric cars that we have in the current future, there is a much more effect. For example, want to at least have a widespread idea, but there is some technology that we can use, for example, to adapt and save our world, something like that. I think this is something that's really good to make people be pocket-heated or something in the size. I think regardless it is cheaper or not, conventional I think is something that's worse. Compared to another thing, I think we explained to you what regardless is something that's principally better, make us far higher than other two benches. So this is the big crap.
Okay, thank you. So because this is a silent round, everyone, no oral education by me. You can just go back to the main room and wait for the announcement. For judges, please stay here. Thank you so much, everyone, for the debate.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Oke, for CG, CEO, Orcom, LO, ya monggo boleh link record roomnya.